Hello everyone, welcome to the first devlog for StellCraft. At least that's probably what the name's going to be at this point. This game's been in development for a while, and I probably should have done a devlog a little earlier, but it wasn't as pretty until now. So I think this is a good point where things look nice and maybe people will actually be interested in looking at it. So first things first, StellCraft is a 3D voxel game with some big ambitions for the future. Right now, it's pretty simple. You know, nothing special. Just some water, some trees, some grass, and a whole bunch of other things scattered throughout the world. So I'll probably break this video into a few different sections. Hopefully, I'll timestamp them. And feel free to skip around and what you're interested in, take a watch. So without further ado, I'll first cover the generation. So this world is generated using Perlin noise. It's a 2D Perlin noise map. If you're familiar with Perlin noise, it's how most voxel games like this that have procedural infinite generation work. Nothing too crazy. White spots in a Perlin noise map might become hills, black spots might become valleys, or in this case, more like ocean levels. That's the basics for that. Things that are above ocean level show up as grasses, or a grass like this. Things below ocean level show up as sand, or take the block ID of sand. Anything that would be air that's below ocean level becomes the ID of water, and above it becomes the ID of air. Fairly straightforward, nothing too crazy. Now you might have noticed that, unlike most voxel games, this isn't entirely a blocky world. There are a lot of slopes and edges and things that kind of help smooth out the terrain a little bit. That's one feature I really wanted to add to make the game a little more unique, stand out a little more, and allow users to have a little bit more input and say into how their builds will look. So how I handled that was we go through the game with a first pass and do all the basic generation, deciding on all the ID types. And then on our second pass, we come back through, and for each block, we compare its surrounding blocks. And depending on what it's surrounded by, if it's the same type of ID, or a solid block, or an air block, it will become a slope, or a regular block, or a corner, regular slopes, and things of that nature. And we can even see it in the trees up here. It also follows the same algorithm, becoming nice, smooth, rounded out trees. In the future, I'd like to add some more interesting trees to be a little more, well, a little less boxy. So yeah, decides on the shape for each one and then orients it appropriately. After that, we come back around and we do our structures. Trees are really the only major structure right now, or the only, I guess, additive structure, along with these sticks and rocks that you'll see around the world. And I'll give you a demo of that right now. So we have like these sticks that break down and rocks. Another thing that we have for structures, and this is more of a reductive, I guess, or subtractive structure, is caves. Caves and caverns. Let's see if we can find one. Hopefully we can break. Oh, that was really quick. Entirely unplanned. But yeah, we fell right into a perfect cavern. So this is a cavern. We can see it also utilizes the same slopes and the same edges as the above ground. This was also generated via 3D Perlin noise, unlike the top, which is generated with 2D. It begins by two different passes. The first pass comes through and generates the caverns, which are just large, usually circular or oblong sort of shapes. And then it comes back around and does sort of a spaghetti cave pattern. And these spaghetti caves, I can actually give you a better view than this. These spaghetti caves kind of link up all of our caverns, making it a more, this is another cavern right here, making it kind of more connective so that the player will have a fun time kind of exploring caves. It'll feel like it's infinite, hopefully. And in reality, it is pretty much infinite. So that was a fun thing to do. Not too difficult either, surprisingly. What else do we have? I guess that's largely covers it for structuring. Like I said, the world is infinite. It will continue to generate no matter where I go, so I can even maybe drop down to this cave and go wherever I want with it. And well, that's about it for structure. Let's move on to handling voxel data. Hello everyone, welcome to the section on voxel data. So, every voxel in the game has a set of data that's being utilized to save the world and render meshes and all those sorts of things. And here I'm just going to quickly cover the different types of data that are held within the voxel state, and make it make a little more sense. So our first piece of data for the voxel state is the ID, and these IDs will be things like dirt, sand, water, wood, leaves, things like that. Really straightforward. Then we have orientation. Now orientation only really matters, maybe we should cover shape first. So shape is the shape of the block itself. So it could be a regular block, it can be a slope like you've seen, or a corner slope, or a wide corner slope. And then we have our orientations, which only really matter if there is a shape other than a block, because a block oriented any direction is still a block. So those orientations determine what direction our slopes face, or other unique shapes. This one is more recent. This is the fluid piece of data. Now, as of right now, there's 3 different fluids in the game. There's air, water, and lava. Lava is yet to really be utilized in the generation. Air, of course, you've seen or have not seen, I guess. Then we have fluids. Now, the reason why I went with water having both an ID type and a fluid is because I wanted the ability to waterlog blocks. So, we can go back to the game actually for this. Oh, it's still up. Cool. So we can see here that we have slopes, for example, and these slopes actually have water in them as well. So this block right here, for example, is both a water block and a sand block, or a sand slope block. And the only way I could really handle that was if I had an additional piece of data for fluids. So that's how I handled allowing for waterlogging of different shapes like slopes. Otherwise it would be a really weird, and I actually had this for a minute, a weird situation where, slopes would be right next to water and you expect the water to move into the slope, but it just doesn't. So this is the path I took for that. There's also hydration. Hydration's an interesting one that I've also recently implemented. Hydration level can run between 0 and 100. Even though it's a byte, it's restricted between 0 and 100 in the actual other parts of the code. And that's kind of the percentage of hydration. So unlike a lot of other voxel games, this game allows for partially filled water blocks. And I'll go ahead and demo that real quick, because it's pretty interesting and fun to watch. So what I mean by partially filled is the block isn't necessarily, a Boolean, is water, is not water. It is, I'll just demo it, it'll make more sense that way. So It's worth mentioning that all sand blocks here are currently saturated with water, so they are actually at 100% water. Even though you can't see the water in them, there's uh, a Boolean property called permeability, or permeable, I think I called it permeable, and that determines whether the block itself is permeable or impermeable to water. And sand is definitely permeable in this case. So we'll see dirt is impermeable, although that will probably change in the future. So if I break this permeable block, you can see the water immediately starts to flood into the neighboring block. And we'll see it will even move on to this block here once it's reached a certain level. There it goes. So this block is depositing its water into here. Then the other neighbor blocks deposit their water as well. This might stay in the game, or it might not. It does take a bit of a toll. One, having to regenerate the mesh, and two, doing all the calculations to determine where the water goes. And you're probably wondering, like, oh, well, the water's coming from somewhere. Where are we losing water? And that I can actually tell you because I've done it in the same spot roughly before. I believe the water is actually lost, oops, from over here. So we can see water being lost and dragged along to the other, to our area. This is still a work in progress. Water physics is a complicated thing, but it's been also a joy to work on. But yeah, that's the idea for hydration. We'll see if it sticks around. I might move to a different system for this, depending how it runs on slower computers and if it makes logical sense for the game in the end. What else do we have to talk about in Voxel Data? Temperature. Temperature is something that I haven't yet implemented, but I'm really excited to. Temperature will run from 0 to probably 256 since it's a byte. Oh, and the reason why I've chosen bytes here is because bytes are the smallest sort of data I could use for this system while still getting a nice range. Hints would have been fine, but their data use is a little more than I would have liked. Pools are obviously out of the question. Floats would be way too much data for this system. Bytes I found to be a happy medium, and when this game runs, I think it runs somewhere around a gigabyte as of right now. And when more land generates, that of course increases since we're not yet unloading chunks, properly unloading chunks. But back to temperature. Temperature is something that's yet to be implemented, but I'm hoping it'll be kind of a fun thing. So I'm hoping during the day I can heat up blocks on the surface and at night let them cool down. Maybe certain blocks, like for example, you have a copper block and you heat it up to a certain temperature, it might actually become a fluid, allowing you to do some really cool crafting techniques and things of that nature. Very excited for that kind of thing. I'd like to, and this is maybe a little too ambitious, but I would like to implement a water cycle system where the water on the surface of the lake here will actually evaporate. And then over time, when you hit a cooler day, precipitate back down. Might be a little too ambitious. There's a lot of other challenges I see with that sort of system. Even this system right here, like you saw back over here, how it pulled water from here. That's a bit of an issue because, you know, depending on how far you load, like say we were to drain this entire area, but we had unloaded chunks over here. Then when we walk over there and we load those chunks, the rest of the lake would flood right back in. That would be very abrupt. Especially if we flooded a cave and we lost all this water first. I don't know. There are some really interesting technical challenges around that need to be considered and resolved at some point. But for now, it looks pretty cool. I'm hoping I can find some way to handle that in the future. A little bit of a long-winded explanation for this. Oh, then we also have deci blocks, and these are partially filled blocks. Deci blocks are, for example, our sticks, where they are stones, where they only take up a portion of the block, and they have their own unique data. That'll be covered more in the crafting system. But that's about it right now for voxel states. Hello, welcome to this section on world interaction. A lot has gone into figuring out how world interaction will work in this game. One of the first things that's worth mentioning is actual collisions, like how are we walking on the surface and everything. Initially, I had written some code to, I had assumed, this was a bad assumption, I had assumed that Unity's custom mesh collider would be a little overkill for this sort of system. Because every time we, for example, break a block, well, we have to re-render the mesh, which means the collider needs to be reestablished, and this and that. And I had wrongly assumed that that would be too heavy for especially slower systems to handle. So I had gone and actually written a tremendous amount of code for this movement physics engine. And it started off really easy because there was just blocks. It was just block collisions. And then it slowly progressed into a nightmare because we had to start handling if we can move within slopes, then can we move within corner slopes? And can we move within wide corner slopes? And then in addition, we had to handle rotations on top of that. So it was either write a method for every single possible orientation of every single possible slope, and that was completely unfeasible. So I had written it down and fashioned this to handle the actual orientation of the block itself, determine its quaternion rotation, standardize our velocities for a sort of standardized orientation, and then process it to determine, can the player move, can the player not move, is the player going up the slope? Okay, redirect our velocity into a new velocity and move that velocity that way. And it was, I mean, it turned into, actually, I thought it was 700 by 500 lines of code. And this is probably the third iteration of it. And I was fairly happy with it, to be entirely honest. And someone I was talking to said, you know, maybe it's worth giving the collider a shot, though, the mesh collider. I thought, I probably won't be able to handle it. I mean, this is a procedurally generated world with the enormous meshes. So I tried it, and it worked perfectly. Lessons learned. So what you're seeing right now is actually the mesh collider to allow the user to move up, down slopes, and interact with the world, run into trees, things of that nature. So that covers collision code. On top of that, we'll move into block breaking. Block breaking is a progressive thing. So we can see if we partially break it, the progress will actually be retained. And this is a float that's retained in the by a class on the player that's breaking progress. So if you're breaking, for example, the hardest rock on Earth and you accidentally unclick your mouse, it's okay. Progress has been retained. The downside is that progress gets reset if you look at a different block. But I think this is a good enough medium. I didn't want to try to put breaking progress on every block. That seemed like an unnecessary waste of data. But yeah, we can see we have progress, and then when it breaks and drops a nice block item that can be retrieved by the player. That's block breaking in a nutshell. Of course, we can take this block and we can slap it on a tree, and it'll become interactable again, just like the rest of the mesh. Nothing too crazy. Good morning, and welcome to the section on the day-night cycle. So as you can see, this looks a little different than it looked before, and that's because it's currently morning. We have nice long shadows, a red hue in the air, which should probably be tilted to a little more of an orangish. But yeah, it's currently early morning. This was done using a light source that's programmatically changed as the time progresses throughout the day. So I'll show you here, for example. We have our full day last 480 seconds, and our time right now is about 60 seconds into sunrise. That's the idea. So it programmatically reassigns the light values, the light source's color, so we can see as it becomes closer to midday, it's slowly becoming a nice white light. And then the evening, I won't make you wait all these minutes for it, but in the evening, we'll see that it becomes a nice shade of red, a golden hour kind of thing at the end of the day. And you can also see the shadows are pretty much constantly moving as the day progresses. See these guys moving. Oh, that was fun. Essentially just the standard Unity shader. Nothing too custom there. But yeah, that's the day-night cycle. Some things I'd like to do with it. I'm not totally sure yet. Maybe lower vision, of course. Spawn some mobs. I don't know what else yet. That's kind of TBD. But that's a day-night cycle. I'll just go and show you an evening, although it doesn't look much different than the night. There we go. Oh, that's a little too past. So this is actually night. This is past sunset. So if I take this and I establish it at, let's see, just before sundown, I think it's about 200 seconds. Yeah, we can see it's a nice red, and the shadows are moving still in the same direction, and things are becoming increasingly red. Another thing I'd like to do is implement an actual sun. There's technically no sun in the skybox yet, which is kind of a weird thing to look at. You know, it's a beautiful sunset with no sun, but people tell me that they like the sun, so we'll probably add that in. I'd also like to at some point add a moon that will, for the sake of authenticity, follow the cycle of the actual moon and provide its own light source. One thing that you might have noticed there is that the sun turned off very quickly. Light just kind of shut off. And that's something that I'd like to work on as well. Kind of smoothing that transition, that light value down gently. So it's not an abrupt, there goes the sun, and then in the morning, here's the sun, kind of thing. But yeah, I'm fairly happy with it so far. But there's definitely still some work to do. That's the day-night cycle. Welcome to this section of the video about problems and other thoughts for the future. I guess the first one is crafting. Now, this isn't really a problem. Crafting's really been pretty much, at least mostly complete. You might have been wondering why there's so many sticks and stones just littered throughout the landscape here. And that's because they're going to be used for crafting. I'm not yet ready to reveal the crafting system for this game, although it's mostly complete. I'm probably going to hold off on that until it's a little more developed because it's a very exciting crafting system that I'm uh, looking to keep secret for now. Some other things that are worth mentioning. Uh, Water. We've already kind of covered water a little bit, but I'll go ahead and show you something more ridiculous. That's one of the reasons why I'm kind of uncertain if this is how I want to handle water. So we're of course underwater, and it's also worth mentioning that there should be a blue filter over the vision when you're underwater, or some sort of indication that you're actually under. Oh, and there's also swimming. I forgot to mention that earlier. But if I were to dig, and I happen to know that there's a cavern down here, if I dig down here, we'll see that the hole that I dug begins to fill with water. But not only that, this cavern's enormous. And just the FPS. You can saw it dip down to 50 right there. Sure, it'll fill. It'll work over time. But this is planned to be a multiplayer game. And I can tell you right now, oh, there it starts filling in the bottom. I can tell you right now that this is utilizing a lot more RAM than I'm comfortable with. And I think the last time I tested this, it was something around 4 gigabytes during these more extreme instances of like filling in an entire cavern with a lake. Will users do this? Probably not, but well, yeah, it's always worth assuming that the user is always malicious. And if 4 users were to do this around the world, we would find that your server's probably going to crash. So I'm not sure if this is how I'm actually going to end up handling water in the end. Although it's kind of a neat feature. We'll see. I'll have to find some way around to that. Some other problems. Mesh generation is a little slow. Currently, I think it's running on a secondary thread. Oh, we can actually see. We should. Oh, there's another problem. We should not be able to see sunlight through here. I'm not entirely sure where that's even coming from. Well, there's another problem worth mentioning, that the sunlight is, that's not exactly right. Actually, I think I know why that is. But that's not what we're covering right now. Let me see if we break a block. Well, that one actually dropped really quickly. But some of the times it's not quite as fast as I'd like. So we might need to cover that a little differently. I think currently it's running on a secondary thread. When it's not regenerating the mesh, but when it's, well, yeah, pretty much when it regenerates the mesh, and then it sets the mesh to the mesh and the main thread, since that can't be done on a second thread. That's one other issue. There's a bunch of other little small issues and caveats and things that need to be added. But, you know, that's part of development. I think that pretty much covers it for problems right now. Yeah, welcome to the outro. So, I just want to thank everyone for sticking around if you watched the whole thing. I know it was a bit of a long video, but I hope it was at least a bit interesting. Maybe you learned something from it, or maybe you leave a comment and I can learn something from you. I'd also like to thank all the different YouTube channels for their wealth of knowledge here and there. The Unity docs, of course. And in particular, I don't know how to say his name, but B3AGZ. If you ever end up watching this, your YouTube videos helped me a lot. He has some really good tutorials on how a system like this can work. That gave me a really good basis for how a voxel system game can work. Uh, yeah, thanks to all the different YouTube channels who provide knowledge on this, the Unity tutorials as well. Um, this has been a long project. It's been a ton of fun. There's still so much work to do. I probably bit off more than I could chew, but it's okay. I'm gonna finish it. This has been a blast. It's been a really fun game to work on. Um, if you want to support me, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter. I will be posting updates on there regularly. Um, maybe by this point that you're watching this, I have a Kickstarter or Patreon or something. Uh, but yeah, thank you for watching. I hope it wasn't too long, and stay tuned. There's a lot more to come. Have a great day, and thanks a bunch.